Well, he thought that your sense of meaning, roughly speaking, you can think meaning is kind of like that which attracts your attention, we'll say, just for the sake of simplicity. If you're careful and you haven't filled your head up with garbage, which means you don't lie to yourself, so that's like step one. You can't lie to yourself because that screws up your brain and then you can't trust it. So we'll just say you're not doing that, or you're trying not to do that. Then your brain orients you to this and that. It says, wow, isn't that interesting? And you don't have much control over that. Your brain just does that. Wow, that's interesting. And you might think, why do I think that's interesting? But you don't know. And so that begs the question, who does know if it's not you? Who's in control in there? Well, Jung's answer was, he called it a mechanism called the self, which was the sort of superordinate you that was superordinate to your ego, and it told you what to be interested in. And what it told you to be interested in was any manifestation of any circumstance that looked like it might be aligned with winning the metagame. So not only can you detect the environment in a sense, which isn't what you think it is, it's more like known and unknown, something like that, at a very high level of abstraction. You can also detect when these invisible elements that you can't see line up properly. And your brain will orient towards that. You think, wow, that's meaningful, wow, that's fascinating, isn't there something cool about that? Don't I love investigating that and being in that state of mind? And the answer to that, yes, you do love it. Why? Well, it's not because you're going to get more like Lexuses or Lexi maybe? Lexuses, if you do that, or although maybe that'll be one of the things that happen. It's because your brain is trying to tell you that if you pay attention to that and you're diligent in its pursuit, it's like Mercurius, the Mercurius of the alchemists who would lead you to the gold. If you're diligent in your pursuit of that, then everything lines up for you. And even better, maybe everything lines up for everyone else. And then everyone gets what they want. Or maybe it's even better than that, because who cares what you want? Maybe what happens if you're very diligent about that and you're open to the possibility, you're not manipulating the damn world all the time, but trying to find out where the Tao flows and being part of that, maybe what happens is you get what's best for you, whatever that is. And at the same time, while you're making the world best for you, and that doesn't mean you just get what you want, because you're too dumb to figure out what's best for you, and who cares what you want. We're going to assume what's best for you, and then maybe it's even better than that, because we are so deeply social that there's a place where what's best for you is simultaneously best for everyone else too, over long frames of time. And you have an inkling of that, you have a vision of it. And that's the vision of utopia or the kingdom of heaven or any of these things. And this is such a vision. One of the things it says is, the exploratory hero eternally rules over the kingdom of heaven. It's like, yes, that's right. It's not a metaphor. It's not a metaphor. It's more like a category. And a category and a metaphor aren't the same thing. So there's the frame, and it's a story in a sense. Or a game, and it might be a story because you might say, well, I was at point A and then I went to point B and here's how I got there. It's not necessarily a very interesting story, but it's sort of like the basic unit of story. And then it's also a game, like a Monopoly game. So what's the point of a Monopoly game? Well, that's hard to say, actually. It depends on your level of analysis, but you could say, well, it's a zero-sum game. You have to get all the money and all the property, and then you win. So winning is one point, but then, well, that's the competitive element of it. But then there's a cooperative element, which is, well, look, you're all playing Monopoly, so you've all decided that the goal is to get all the money. It's a little collective decision. It's a weird one. I mean, why do you care? Well, you do care once you decide that you care, and that's interesting because one of the things that demonstrates is that you can sort of decide what you're going to care about. And I think that's part of the human capacity for abstraction, is that we have these underlying biological systems that in some sense have set motivational content. So if you're deprived of H2O, then you're going to crave and seek water, and that's built into you. But our cortical structures, which emerged out of these lower, more primordial systems and are still structured deeply by them, can substitute abstractions for those more concrete, basic states of desire and goals. And so it's almost as if we can put anything into the goal box. And then we act as if it's important. And that's really part of our capacity for fiction. It's part of our capacity for creativity. It's part of our capacity for storytelling and for imagination and all of these things. And our capacity for abstraction is built on a lower platform that's more primordial, but it still partakes of all the elements of the primordial subsystems because we're constrained by our evolutionary development. Now, then the question might be, well, if you're an aiming sort of person, what should you aim at? That's the question. What should you aim at? And we already hypothesized that you shouldn't aim at winning. You should aim at playing the game properly. But now we don't know what that means. So we're going to figure out what that means. So the first thing you might imagine is that there's the game, Monopoly. You aim at winning, maybe. Maybe you aim at winning. You don't want to aim at winning too hard because then people don't like playing with you and you get all whiny and you act like you're 3 years old when, you get this chance card that says you have to pay $50 on each hotel and you put all that work into getting all those hotels and, that just shows you whose side God is really on. And people react more like that than you'd think. And when they react like, they're cursed by God when they get the wrong chance card, that's worth noting, which is part of the reason you're playing the game too, because you want to figure out who thinks they're cursed by God, and that's a really easy way to do it. Hopefully you also want to have fun while you're playing the game, and there's all sorts of different levels of that. And so you can see that Monopoly is actually a very complicated thing, even though it's simple. And it's also completely bizarre, right, that people will get their emotions all tangled up in that game, even though everyone notices right off the bat that who really cares who has the most plastic hotels. So, but it just shows you how right the Buddhists are, right? Because you can tangle yourself up in a Monopoly game badly enough to lose friendships if you really want to. So that's pretty interesting that people are like that. So anyways, but here's something to think about. So let's say you got a friend and you play Monopoly with them, and that's one thing, and maybe you want to win, but maybe you really like playing Monopoly, just for the sake of argument. And so you don't want to win so badly that you don't ever get to play Monopoly again. And that's a constraint. And so here's a constraint. It's good to play games. It's better to play games than it is to win them. Or it's certainly better to play games than it is to win one game. So then you might ask yourself, well, what exactly is the formal relationship between winning a game or any number of games and being invited to play the maximum number of games? Well, that's a tough question. Then you might ask yourself, well, who's the winner? The person who wins a game, or 5 games, or 10 games, or the person who gets invited to play the largest number of games? And the answer to that is, well, it's the person who gets invited to play the largest number of games. And obviously. And what that means even is that you could lose 70% of the time, let's say, in any game you ever play, and still come out ahead if you get invited to play enough games. Because if you win 30% of the games that you play, and you play an unbelievably large number of high quality games, it's like, not only do you rake in the consequences of that, but everyone's thrilled to play with you because they win a bit more than you do every time you play. So then you might ask, well, what do you mean by win? And that's exactly the same question as, well, what do you mean by, what are you aiming at? So, there's the game, and then there's the game of games. And the game of games is more important than the game, because the game is a subset of the set of games, of the game of games. And the moral rule is, never win the game in such a way that makes you a loser at the game of games. And that's what you're telling your child when you say, it doesn't matter whether you win or lose, it matters how you play the game. And that actually turns out to be right.